Reflection is the quiet fire at the center of the human mind. It is the ability to pause in the midst of life and turn inward, to watch a thought form, to feel an emotion rise, to question a belief, to ask, what is this? Who am I? Why do I feel this way? It is the capacity to step back from experience and witness it from within. Entire civilizations, philosophies, and inner worlds exist because of this single extraordinary ability. Yet reflection is mysterious. It appears so natural, so immediate that its origins are rarely questioned. It feels like something that has always existed. But reflection is not ancient in the cosmic sense. It is not woven into the universe the way gravity or sunlight are. It is young, fragile, hard-won. It is an ability that had to evolve, slowly, painfully, across billions of years. Before reflection, there was only reaction. Before the mind could observe itself, life could only respond to the world outside it. Before questions existed, there was only movement, instinct, and survival. Reflection is not the beginning of the story. It is the outcome of a long, winding path shaped by biology, emotion, memory, language, and culture. To understand reflection is to understand the evolution of the inner world. It is to follow a trail that leads all the way back to the earliest creatures, sensing faint chemical signals in ancient oceans. It is to watch awareness expand as nervous systems appear, as memories deepen, as emotions grow rich and layered. It is to see thought take shape when language emerges, when stories begin to bind communities together, when philosophy attempts to name the self, when religions open the doors of inner silence, and when science finally peers into the machinery of the brain. Reflection is the result of life learning to turn inward. It is one of the universe's most intricate achievements, a mind that can examine itself. This journey begins long before humans. It begins before mammals, before fish, before anything with eyes or language or memory. It begins with simple life, drifting in primordial seas, carrying within it the first faint traces of what would one day become thought. And so the story opens at its true beginning, the first sparks of awareness. In the ancient oceans of early Earth, life began with astonishing simplicity. The planet was young, its atmosphere heavy with volcanic gases, its waters thick with minerals and energy. Lightning cracked across dark skies, stirring chemical reactions that produced the first fragile structures resembling life. These structures had no thoughts, no senses, and no minds, yet they marked the start of a chain of events that would one day lead to reflection. The earliest organisms were single-celled beings that drifted through warm tides. Their existence revolved around basic chemical interactions. They absorbed nutrients. They expelled waste. They responded to pressure, temperature, and the faintest gradients of light. In these rudimentary responses lay the earliest foundation of awareness. Not consciousness, not introspection, but a beginning, a direction, a point where the self first met the world. This primitive capacity to sense and react created the first boundary between internal and external. Within a delicate membrane, a small pocket of order formed, resisting the chaos outside. That boundary, simple, fragile, easily broken, was the earliest biological whisper of, "This is me," and "that is not." It was the faintest outline of identity, the earliest blueprint of all inner worlds to come. As evolution continued, some organisms developed more specialized structures. Molecules within their cells began to coordinate responses more efficiently. Over time, clusters of cells formed networks capable of processing signals. These early neural circuits allowed creatures to navigate their environments with greater precision. They could move toward nourishment, avoid toxins, and occupy territories more effectively. Awareness deepened, not through thought, but through increasing sensitivity. Primitive worms reacted to vibrations and light. Early marine creatures learned to detect current shifts, shadows of predators, and the presence of prey. Each small advance offered an advantage. Evolution began shaping organisms that could monitor their surroundings with growing complexity. The emergence of memory marked another turning point. Even the simplest organisms began to record traces of past experiences within their biochemical systems. These were not memories in the human sense. No images, no stories, no conscious recognition. They were the earliest echoes of learning. If an organism survived a harmful encounter, its future responses changed. Life was beginning to carry the past forward. Over millions of years, nervous systems grew more intricate. Eyes formed, fins and limbs evolved. Creatures began moving with intention, exploring coastlines, rivers, and open seas. With each adaptation, the internal world became richer. Sensation developed into perception. Reaction evolved into coordination. Instinct began to build upon itself, layer by layer. Eventually, early vertebrates emerged, animals with spinal cords and centralized processing centers. These new biological structures allowed for faster communication within the body and more adaptable behavior. Organisms could now gather information from different senses and integrate it into cohesive responses. They could explore landscapes, avoid threats, and seek resources with increasingly sophisticated strategies. In these developments, the earliest shadows of reflection can be seen, not as conscious thought, but as the gradual construction of a mind capable of representing the world. A mind capable of holding information, updating its internal models, and preparing for future events. This was where the roots of reflection took hold, buried deep in the architecture of ancient nervous systems. As creatures grew more complex, they also began interacting with one another in ways that shaped their cognitive evolution. Simple signals, mating calls, warning gestures, and coordinated movements began to appear. Communication introduced new demands on the inner world. Organisms needed to interpret signals, anticipate the actions of others, and adjust their own behavior accordingly. These small steps laid the groundwork for the next major transformation. As life moved from solitary existence to social interaction, the mind expanded its capacity for understanding, not only the environment, but other beings, their movements, their intentions, their patterns. From these early sparks of awareness, the story of reflection continued to build, moving toward creatures that lived together and depended on one another. Cooperation would become a catalyst for deeper cognition. Social bonds would accelerate the evolution of inner experience. The path now leads toward that next stage. Social minds. The evolution of reflection accelerated when life became social. Long before humans appeared, the natural world began shaping creatures that no longer lived isolated lives. Groups formed, loose gatherings at first, then structured societies built on cooperation, coordination, and connection. With this shift, minds were forced to grow inward as much as outward. Early mammals moved through their environments in small, interdependent groups. They faced the challenges of predators, seasonal changes, and the need to protect their young. Survival depended not only on sensing the environment, but on sensing one another. Every movement carried meaning. Every sound was the signal. These interactions required creatures to predict, interpret, and respond to the behavior of others. This was the beginning of social cognition, the ability to understand that other beings possessed intentions and reactions of their own. Primitive forms of empathy emerged as animals learned to track the emotional states of their companions. Fear spread through herds with remarkable speed. Calmness settled through groups resting together. Simple internal representations of others began forming within neural circuits. In these early social structures, a new kind of awareness grew. Individuals started to hold internal models of their group members. They recognized familiar individuals. They remembered the outcomes of past interactions. They formed alliances and avoided rivals. These internal models were not reflective thought as humans know it, but they required mental representations, something akin to an early blueprint for understanding minds beyond one's own. Among primates, this development took a powerful leap forward. Primates lived in complex social groups where cooperation and competition existed side by side. Status, bonding, grooming, play, and conflict defined their daily lives. To survive and thrive, primates needed to read intentions, decipher emotions, and anticipate the behavior of others. This demanded an increasingly intricate inner world. One individual's behavior influenced the entire group. A gesture of reassurance might resolve tension. A moment of eye contact could establish trust or signal warning. Social life became a dance of signals, each movement shaping the minds of all who observed it. The brain began evolving regions responsible for interpreting gaze, expression, and subtle changes in body language. Mirror neurons, cells that activate both when performing an action and when observing someone else perform it, helped build this bridge between inner and outer worlds. Through these mechanisms, creatures developed a sense of the minds around them, and through understanding others, they began to understand themselves. Social life created a feedback loop. By observing behavior, organisms began forming internal definitions of their own tendencies. The seeds of self-awareness grew as a byproduct of interpreting others. Cooperation further expanded this pathway. Hunting in coordinated groups required communication and shared intention. Care for offspring demanded emotional attunement. Sharing food or protecting territory required memory of past interactions and predictions about future behavior. Each of these tasks required mental maps not only of the physical world, but of the social one. In such environments, the ability to pause, even for a moment, and consider another's perspective became a vital skill. It allowed individuals to avoid conflict, strategize within their groups, and form lasting bonds. It laid the groundwork for the reflective capacities that would later blossom in humans. This chapter of evolution turned the mind into more than a tool for survival. It became a space for modeling relationships, comparing perspectives, and simulating possible outcomes. The internal world grew richer, deeper, shaped by the emotional responses of others. For the first time in evolutionary history, emotion and social understanding intertwined, each shaping the other. Out of this interplay, a new dimension of inner life formed, a space where the actions of others echoed inward, where patterns were learned and stored, where expectations grew. This was not reflection yet, but it was its framework, an architecture of thought built from the requirements of social living. As social groups grew more sophisticated, emotions began playing a larger role in shaping internal experience. Social creatures needed to navigate feelings of fear, curiosity, comfort, jealousy, affection, and trust. These emotions added depth to the mind and complexity to relationships. They created the foundation onto which reflection would eventually rest. The story now moves toward the next great expansion of the inner world, a shift from social cognition into emotional richness, from understanding others to understanding inner states, from instinctive reaction to the early sparks of insight. From this point, reflection's path leads into emotion and its transformative role in shaping inner life. Emotion and insight. Long before reflection took shape as conscious thought, it lived in the realm of emotion. Emotion arrived in evolution, not as something abstract or philosophical, but as a guiding force shaped by the demands of survival. It emerged as a biological tool that helped creatures navigate danger, seek safety, bond with others, and adapt to an ever-changing world. In these emotional currents, the earliest form of internal experience developed. In the beginning, emotions were simple. Fear tightened muscles and accelerated motion, pushing a creature to flee. Hunger drove movement toward nourishment. Comfort encouraged rest, healing, and safety. Curiosity drew creatures toward new environments and new opportunities. These emotional states were not reflected upon. They were lived, immediate, embodied, direct. Even so, emotion added depth to the inner world. It created patterns inside the mind, fluctuations in intensity, shifts in direction, waves of activation. Where simple organisms had only reacted, emotional creatures began to feel their reactions. They carried internal signals that lingered long enough to influence future behavior. In early mammals, this emotional landscape expanded dramatically. Warm-blooded bodies allowed for more flexible movement and more complex social lives. Mothers protected their young with fierce devotion, an emotional bond fueled by hormonal and neural changes. Offspring sought comfort, navigating the world through attachment and trust. These early emotional relationships laid the foundation for social complexity, and with it, deeper internal processing. As emotions grew more layered, they created the first glimmers of insight, moments when creatures responded not only to the world around them, but to the world within them. A creature with memory, emotion, and social experience carried a more intricate inner environment. This environment shaped decisions in new ways. Past fear influenced future caution. Past comfort influenced future exploration. Emotional patterns intertwined with memory, producing behavior shaped by internal evaluations rather than mere immediate stimuli. This was the beginning of an inner landscape, a world of signals and sensations that could influence behavior long after an event had passed. Organisms didn't yet know they were feeling, but the feelings nonetheless helped form the architecture of their actions. As evolution continued, emotions gained nuance. Anxiety became a tool for anticipating danger. Joy encouraged repeated actions that benefited survival. Grief preserved social bonds by signaling the significance of loss. Empathy allowed one individual to respond to the distress or well-being of another. These emotional developments enriched the inner world and added complexity to every interaction. Emotional intelligence in primates grew out of this. Groups required emotional attunement to function. Individuals read facial cues, vocalizations, and gestures. Emotional understanding became a survival tool. A subtle shift in posture could reveal threat or reassurance. A quiet call could relay comfort or warning. These exchanges required increasingly refined internal processing, an understanding not only of external signals, but of the feelings those signals produced. From these deep emotional currents came the early ingredients of introspection. When internal states could influence behavior across time, minds began forming patterns about their own tendencies. A creature that had repeatedly experienced fear in a certain context might avoid it even before danger appeared. Anticipation grew stronger. Emotional memory became a guide. Emotion was becoming more than reaction. It was becoming information. This gradual shift laid the groundwork for insight. Insight is the ability to connect internal patterns into meaning. In its earliest form, insight appeared as an improved ability to learn from emotional experience. Creatures developed an internal sense, an intuitive structure that helped them understand what actions were beneficial, harmful, safe, or risky. This intuitive layer of cognition formed the subtle beginnings of reflection. Before a mind could articulate a thought, it had to feel a pattern. Before it could form a question, it had to sense the tension between choices. Before it could imagine a future, it had to experience emotional consequences. Emotion was the bridge between raw sensation and the dawning capacity for reflection. It added depth, contrast, and continuity to experience. It made internal experience rich enough to become something a mind could eventually observe. But emotional depth alone does not give rise to reflective thought. For reflection to flourish, minds needed a relationship with time, a way to look backward, imagine forward, and hold events beyond the present moment. The inner world needed to stretch across past and future. The journey now moves into that next transformation, the rise of memory, the birth of mental time, the expansion of inner life into a space where reflection could finally begin to take shape. Memory and time. Reflection needed more than sensation, more than emotion, and more than social complexity. It needed time. Not the external time measured by sunsets, seasons, or migrations, but an inner sense of time, an ability to hold the past, anticipate the future, and weave both into the present moment. Without this internal timeline, the mind could not observe itself, could not learn deeply, and could not imagine. Memory created the conditions for reflection to exist. In the earliest stages of life, memory was little more than chemical traces. A creature that survived a harmful encounter would react more quickly in similar situations. This was not conscious remembering. It was a shift in biological readiness. Yet, it formed the foundation of something extraordinary. Experience carried forward. As organisms became more complex, memory deepened. Neural circuits repeated patterns. Synapses strengthened or weakened based on outcomes. Creatures began learning not just from direct physical harm or reward, but from subtle associations. A sound might precede danger. A scent might signal nourishment. A location might hold significance. These connections allowed animals to move through the world with a growing sense of context. The internal landscape was stretching. A moment was no longer isolated. It was connected to what came before. This connection introduced a primitive form of mental continuity, the earliest thread of a story. In early vertebrates, this capacity expanded further. Brains began organizing information into short-term and long-term storage. Memories could persist. Decisions were shaped not only by immediate circumstances, but by accumulated experience. Behavior became increasingly flexible. Predictive abilities strengthened. But the true transformation began with the rise of episodic memory, the ability to recall specific events rather than general patterns. This form of memory brought vividness to internal experience. A creature with episodic memory could remember not just that a predator was dangerous, but where it appeared, when it appeared, and what happened just before it arrived. Episodic memory turned life into a sequence of meaningful events. With episodic memory came something even more powerful: mental time travel. Minds began to project themselves backward into past events and forward into imagined futures. This shift was monumental. For the first time, organisms could simulate outcomes without acting them out. They could choose based on possibility rather than only immediate reality. Mental time travel required an internal stage, a space where the mind could place images, sensations, and memories. This stage, unbound by the present moment, was the birthplace of imagination. Imagination allowed early minds to test ideas silently. Should a creature approach a new path or avoid it? Should it wait or move forward? Should it defend or retreat? These decisions were no longer dependent on instinct alone. They were shaped by internal simulations. This was not yet reflection, but it was a crucial step toward it. Reflection requires the ability to step outside of immediate experience and examine it from another place. That requires a mind spacious enough to hold multiple versions of the world at once: the memory of what has happened, the possibility of what could happen, and the present reality unfolding before it. Emotional memory intertwined with episodic memory. A frightening event created strong pathways that influenced future choices. A moment of safety or connection shaped patterns of behavior. These emotional layers gave richness to recollection and weight to anticipation. Memory began to guide identity, not in a conscious sense, but in the shaping of tendencies, preferences, fears, and desires. As the brain expanded in early mammals and primates, the structure of memory became more sophisticated. Neural circuits developed specialized regions for storing spatial layouts, emotional experiences, and social interactions. Some animals recognized themselves in mirrors. Others remembered relationships spanning years. Internal experience grew thick, layered, and complex. This layers of time mind, where past experiences shaped future behaviors, set the stage for self-observation. A creature that can remember its past and plan its future carries a sense of continuity. It exists not just as a momentary point of life, but as a being extended across time. And once a mind stretches across time, a new question becomes possible. What is this continuity made of? What is the self that moves through it? Those questions would emerge much later, but their roots were now firmly planted. Memory made the mind deep. Time made the mind flexible. Imagination made the mind free. But something else was needed to refine reflection, to give it structure and clarity, something that could shape thought into form, give names to feelings, and allow ideas to be shared and compared, something that would ignite the modern inner world. The next transformation was the birth of language, a revolution that would turn the mind inward in a way nothing before it could. The birth of language. The mind had evolved the ability to feel, to remember, and to imagine. Yet, for all its growing complexity, it remained mostly silent. Experiences swirled inside without a clear structure. Thoughts existed as sensations, impulses, and fleeting impressions. Without language, the inner world was vast but unshaped, like a great ocean without a map. Language changed everything. Its origins were not sudden. The first true languages did not appear fully formed, with grammar and symbols. They began as gestures, calls, rhythms, and shared sounds passed between early hominins long before modern humans existed. These early vocalizations were practical tools, a warning shout, a call for help, a signal of discovery. But each carried a spark of something transformative, shared meaning. Shared meaning allowed minds to connect. When two beings understood the same sound in the same way, a bridge formed between their inner worlds. Slowly, this bridge became stronger. Gestures evolved into symbols. Symbols evolved into words. Words evolved into sentences. And sentences became the architecture of thought. Before language, internal experience was bound tightly to the present. With language, minds could grasp ideas, hold them, examine them, refine them, and share them. Words created edges around feelings, categories around perceptions, and structure around memories. They allowed the mind to navigate its own depths. As language grew, so did abstraction, the ability to think beyond the immediate and concrete. Early humans began naming things they could not see: wind, time, absence, hope, memory. Naming these concepts changed how they were experienced. A feeling once wordless could now be recognized. A thought once vague could now be shaped. A memory once private could now be told. Language did more than label the world. It became a mirror held up to the mind itself. For the first time, inner experience could be described. Through description, it became clearer. Through clarity, it became something that could be questioned, reconsidered, and understood. Reflection gained its most powerful tool, the ability to articulate the internal world. This articulation reshaped the brain. Neural circuits adapted to store words, patterns, and syntax. Communication became more than sound. It became an exchange of ideas. The ability to speak about the past and imagine the future grew sharper. Social structures strengthened around shared stories and coordinated plans. Knowledge stretched across generations through language rather than instinct alone. As early humans sat together at the edges of firelight, language transformed their nights. They told stories of hunts, storms, ancestors, and spirits. They shared fears, hopes, warnings, and dreams. These stories were not merely entertainment, they were cognitive evolution. Each shared narrative helped minds practice imagination, morality, identity, and memory. Language created a collective inner world long before philosophy or science existed. Within individuals, language gave rise to something profoundly new: internal speech. At first, it may have been faint, small shadows of spoken words echoing within the mind. Over generations, this inner voice grew stronger, becoming a steady companion in decision-making, planning, and remembering. The capacity to think in words allowed humans to organize their minds with remarkable precision. Reflection became structured thought. Thought became dialogue. Dialogue became introspection. Language allowed humans to explain themselves to others, but more crucially, it allowed them to explain themselves to themselves. With words, the mind could ask questions. It could confront its own uncertainty. It could describe its own feelings, even when they were complex or contradictory. It could trace its own patterns across time. Language gave humans not just the capacity to reflect, but the capacity to understand that they were reflecting. As language continued to evolve, it spilled beyond the practical and into the symbolic, the emotional, and the imaginative. It shaped myths and rituals. It carried histories and genealogies. It allowed humans to build worlds not only with stone and wood, but with meaning. Every culture developed its own linguistic landscape, each one a different lens through which the mind could interpret itself. Language became the mind's greatest tool. but also its doorway into deeper territories. The moment words gained narrative power, something ancient and transformative emerged, a new way of seeing the world and the self. The next chapter of this story unfolds with the rise of myth and story, where reflection took its first cultural form, where early humans began to weave meaning, identity, and understanding into vast tapestries of imagination, where the inner world expanded through the stories that shaped entire civilizations. Myth and story. When language began to shape thought, another breakthrough emerged, one that would transform human consciousness more profoundly than any tool or invention. Humans discovered story. At first, stories were simple, a retelling of a hunt, an account of danger, a memory of a journey. But even in their simplest forms, stories altered the structure of the inner world. They turned isolated events into meaningful sequences. They connected the past with the present. They offered explanations, patterns, and coherence. Story was reflection externalized. Early humans gathered around firelight, their faces illuminated by shifting flames, their shadows dancing on the walls of caves. Those flames were more than warmth and protection. They created a boundary between the dark unknown and the illuminated world of imagination. In the glow, voices carried memory and meaning across generations. These voices shaped identity, morality, and understanding long before writing existed. Early myths explained the world. They gave form to thunder, rain, night, death, and the silent forces of nature. They made the cosmos feel intimate, accessible, and emotionally resonant. But myths also explained the self. They helped humans navigate fear, grief, courage, loyalty, and belonging. They offered narratives through which individuals understood their place in the world. Stories turned experience into metaphor, and metaphor became a tool for inner exploration. A storm was not just a storm. It became a symbol for conflict. A river was not just a river. It became a symbol for time. A journey was not just a journey. It became a symbol for the arc of a life. Through symbolic meaning, stories allowed the mind to understand itself in deeper ways. Myth expanded the emotional landscape, offering ways to articulate experiences that language alone could not fully express. As storytelling evolved, it became a collective form of reflection. A community could explore its fears and hopes through shared narratives. Rituals emerged around these stories, reenactments, dances, chants, and ceremonies that merged imagination with action. In these rituals, inner life became external, visible, and communal. Stories also served another crucial purpose. They shaped memory. In oral cultures, the past was not written down. It lived in the minds of the people. Generations carried the weight of history through carefully preserved narratives. These stories were fluid yet structured, changing subtly while retaining their core truths. Through them, cultures remembered their origins, their ancestors, their values. In this way, story became the first technology of memory. Story also functioned as a scaffold for identity. Individuals growing within a community inherited its myths and narratives, absorbing the values embedded in them. They learned who they were through the stories told about their people. They learned how to act through the stories told about heroes and ancestors. They learned how to reflect through the stories told about suffering and wisdom. And perhaps most significantly, stories allowed humans to explore what could not be seen. The wolf in the dark, the spirit in the forest, the presence in the storm. These were not literal truths but expressions of inner experience. Fear, uncertainty, awe, longing. These emotions were projected onto the world and transformed into narrative forms. This projection was one of the first major leaps toward introspection. By externalizing inner experiences through story, humans created a mirror for their own minds. They could examine their fears from a distance. They could understand their desires through characters. They could observe their inner conflicts through symbolic tales. Story was the first middle ground between the external world and the internal one. It allowed humans to hold both in the same mental space. This duality, outer symbol, inner meaning, became a defining feature of human consciousness. Through myth, reflection grew communal. It became part of culture. It shaped how minds interpreted life, death, purpose, morality, and destiny. It guided decision-making. It eased suffering. It offered explanations when none could be found elsewhere. As myths became more complex, they evolved into entire systems of thought, cosmologies, and worldviews. Over thousands of years, these mythic systems grew large enough to give rise to a new kind of reflection, one that questioned not only the world and the self, but the meaning behind both. From this fertile ground, a new age began. Humans did not merely tell stories, they began to ask deeper questions. They began to examine the nature of existence, the structure of reality, and the purpose of life. This shift marked the dawn of formal introspection, the rise of ancient philosophy. Ancient philosophy. As myths grew into vast symbolic systems, they carried humanity for tens of thousands of years. But eventually, something shifted. A threshold was crossed. Minds that had been shaped by story began doing something unprecedented. They questioned the stories themselves. They questioned the meaning behind ritual, the nature of existence, the structure of reality, and the inner workings of thought. This marked the birth of philosophy, not as a discipline in the modern sense, but as a new mode of consciousness. Humans were no longer just telling stories about the world. They were analyzing the world. They were no longer just inheriting meaning. They were searching for it. The evolution of reflection entered a new era. This transformation did not occur in a single place. It emerged independently across continents, shaped by different landscapes, different histories, and different worldviews. Yet all these early philosophical traditions shared a common thread. They pursued understanding by turning inward as well as outward. Along the river valleys of ancient India, early thinkers began contemplating the nature of the self. They asked what consciousness was made of, what lay beneath the shifting layers of thought and emotion, and what happened when the mind grew quiet. Their insights were preserved in the Upanishads, texts that explored the hidden reality behind appearances, the unity of all things, and the mysterious presence of awareness itself. These early philosophers studied not only the world, but experience itself, reaching inward toward the essence of being. In ancient China, the early sages observed the rhythms of nature and the flow of life. They noticed how everything changed, how opposites intertwined, how harmony emerged from balance. From these observations grew traditions like Taoism and Confucianism. Taoist thinkers examined the subtle movement of the natural world, searching for the effortless path through existence. Confucian thinkers turned their attention to the structure of society, the cultivation of character, and the ethical life. Both traditions pushed reflection into the realm of insight, an understanding that wisdom required not only thought, but attunement. Farther west, in the cities of ancient Greece, a different kind of inquiry took shape. Greek thinkers began breaking the world into concepts: form, substance, logic, virtue, essence. They debated the nature of truth, reason, and the soul. They explored why humans act as they do, how knowledge is formed, and what makes a good life. From these discussions emerged the foundations of analytic thought. Socrates questioned assumptions through dialogue, turning reflection into a sharpened tool. Plato explored the structure of reality and the architecture of the mind. Aristotle catalogued the world and dissected the mechanisms of thought. Across cultures, whether in India, China, Greece, or countless other traditions, philosophy emerged as a structured form of introspection. Reflection became systematic. Thoughts became subjects for analysis. Experience became something to explore deliberately, not merely to endure or recount. Humans began noticing their inner processes, their desires, fears, intentions, and contradictions. They began examining the mind the way earlier thinkers examined the stars or the seasons. Philosophy also introduced an important shift in reflective thinking, the search for universals. Humans began looking for truths that existed beyond individual experience, truths that held across time, cultures, and conditions. This pursuit encouraged minds to step outside personal narratives and observe themselves with greater detachment. This detachment strengthened self-awareness. It allowed individuals to ask, what is the nature of the self? What is the origin of thought? What is the relationship between mind and world? These questions pushed reflection to new depths. They demanded long stretches of contemplation, debate, reasoning, and stillness. They gave rise to practices, meditation, inquiry, dialogue, that would shape entire civilizations and define human inner life for millennia. And yet, philosophy did not replace myth. It evolved from it. Myths offered meaning. Philosophy offered understanding. Together, they enriched the human experience, one providing symbolic resonance, the other conceptual clarity. As philosophical traditions matured, they converged on a powerful realization. The inner world was not merely a space of emotion and memory. It was a landscape that could be cultivated, shaped, and transformed. Reflection became a practice, not only of thinking, but of being. From this realization emerged another profound development. Humans did not only explore thought, they explored the soul, the spirit, the inner quiet beyond language. They sought the depths that lay beneath reflection itself. The next transformation arose here, in the growing tension between everyday life and the inner sanctuaries of contemplation. It took form in ritual, meditation, prayer, solitude, and spiritual discipline. The story continues into religion and the shaping of the inner life. Religion and inner life. As human societies grew in size and complexity, the search for meaning pressed deeper into the human mind. Philosophy questioned the world through ideas, but religion reached into a different dimension, into the felt, the sacred, the mysterious currents flowing beneath ordinary experience. Religion did not simply offer explanations, it offered practices. It built structures that guided the inner life long before psychology or neuroscience existed. It created spaces in which humans encountered silence, awe, and introspection in ways that reshaped consciousness. Long before temples and doctrines, early humans sensed the world as alive with presence. Storms carried intention, rivers carried spirit, mountains held wisdom. Rituals emerged as a way to connect with unseen forces, but they also served another purpose. They drew individuals inward. Through repetition, rhythm, dance, and chant, the mind entered altered states. These states deepened emotional awareness and opened windows into the inner world. The first priests, shamans, and spiritual figures became explorers of these inner territories. They fasted, dreamt, meditated, and wandered into solitude. In doing so, they discovered that the mind could shift dramatically when quieted or focused. They learned that attention could be shaped, breath could be steady, silence could reveal something vast within. These practices were not philosophical arguments, they were embodied experiences. They revealed dimensions of the mind inaccessible through ordinary thought. In ancient India, spiritual seekers retreated into forests, practicing forms of meditation that slowed the breath, steadied the senses, and calmed the rushing current of thought. They realized that beneath the noise of the mind lay a subtler, quieter awareness. Reflection deepened beyond thinking. It became observation, not of the world, but of the mind itself. In China, Taoist adepts sought alignment with the rhythms of nature. Through stillness, breath, and inward focus, they aimed to harmonize the internal world with the flow of existence. Their introspection grew from the belief that wisdom came from attunement, not struggle. This attunement sharpened internal sensitivity, allowing thoughts, emotions, and intentions to be felt with extraordinary clarity. In the Middle East, early mystical traditions taught that reflection required surrender. They spoke of divine presence flowing through moments of silence. Their practices emphasized inward humility, listening rather than analyzing, yielding rather than grasping. Through prayer and contemplation, entire communities built rituals that directed attention toward the inner realm. In the Americas, Africa, and countless other regions, spiritual traditions used trance, storytelling, and ceremony to connect inner experience with communal understanding. These rituals strengthened the emotional fabric of societies, anchoring the individual mind to something larger. Reflection expanded through shared meaning, shared vulnerability, and shared imagination. Religion also introduced the concept of moral introspection. Humans began examining not only what they thought, but whether those thoughts aligned with a greater ethical vision. The idea of conscience, an inner guide shaped by values, added a new layer to the reflective mind. People began evaluating motives, conflicts, and desires in the quiet of their inner world. Self-awareness became intertwined with responsibility. Through religious and spiritual traditions, the inner life became a shared human pursuit. People meditated together, prayed together, mourned together, and celebrated together. These practices created collective pathways into inner experience. Reflection became more than a solitary act. It became a cultural inheritance. Ritual silence. Moments of stillness during ceremonies or meditation played a profound role. Silence heightened awareness. It revealed the texture of thought. It exposed patterns of emotion and memory. It allowed individuals to witness their own minds as if from a distance. This distancing was one of the earliest forms of mindfulness, long before the word existed. As spiritual traditions matured, they built entire systems around introspection. Some emphasized discipline and self-control. Others emphasized surrender and release. Still others emphasized presence, the ability to be fully engaged with the moment without being carried away by it. Through these practices, humans discovered that the mind was not a fixed structure, but a dynamic field. It could be shaped, trained, and transformed. It could become calmer, clearer, more compassionate, more expansive. Reflection evolved into a tool for inner growth. Yet even with these advances, introspection remained tethered to external frameworks. Myths, rituals, and doctrines guided the inner journey. But something new was forming beneath the surface, an emerging voice within the mind itself, a private, internal companion that grew stronger as language matured and memory expanded. Humans began carrying conversations inside their thoughts. They evaluated actions, rehearsed possibilities, debated choices, and imagined outcomes. This internal dialogue became central to reflective life. The next chapter explores this powerful transformation, the evolution of the inner voice. The evolution of the inner voice. As language matured and inner life deepened, something subtle but extraordinary began to form within the human mind. It did not emerge all at once. It accumulated slowly, shaped by memory, emotion, imagination, and the pressure of social living. At first, it was only a faint echo, a quiet impression of speech lingering after words were spoken aloud. Over generations, this echo grew stronger. It developed structure. It gained tone. It became a presence within consciousness. The inner voice. This voice was not supernatural, nor was it always comforting. It was an internal extension of language itself, the mind's ability to communicate inwardly. Where once thoughts existed only as impressions or impulses, they now took on verbal form. Ideas were spoken silently within the mind. Plans were rehearsed in advance. Emotions were named and interpreted. Past events were retold internally, and imagined futures were narrated before they occurred. The inner voice turned the mind into both speaker and listener. It created a dialogue within consciousness, allowing humans to reason, reflect, analyze, and question. This internal conversation changed the landscape of thought. Early humans likely experienced this internal speech differently than modern individuals. As language was still young, the inner voice may have felt like an external presence, a whisper of memory, a guiding echo of ancestors, a voice carried by ritual or belief. In many cultures, early inner speech was interpreted as communication with spirits, gods, or the unseen world. Over time, these experiences became more internalized, understood not as external forces, but as part of the self. With the rise of complex societies, the inner voice took on new roles. It became a tool for navigating social expectations. Humans rehearsed conversations, evaluated their emotions, and imagined how others might respond. The mind became a space where social interactions unfolded before they happened. This capacity gave individuals an enormous evolutionary advantage. They could predict outcomes, adjust behavior, and reflect on their own motives. The inner voice also strengthened self-awareness. It allowed individuals to narrate their lives, to weave events into a coherent story. This narrative became a framework for identity. People began seeing themselves not just as beings experiencing the world, but as protagonists moving through time. The continuous thread of internal speech linked childhood memories to present perspectives and future aspirations. The self became a story told within the mind, constantly updated, revised, and expanded. This continuous narration also brought new challenges. The inner voice could soothe or torment. It could guide or confuse. It could illuminate insight or amplify doubt. For the first time in evolutionary history, minds could turn against themselves. Internal conflict appeared in a sharper form. The mind could criticize its own actions, replay mistakes, or imagine fears more vividly than any external threat. Yet even these conflicts were part of reflection's evolution. To question one's own behavior, to challenge impulses, to weigh options, these were powerful tools for growth. The internal dialogue provided space for second thoughts, reconsideration, and self-correction. It made morality, empathy, and long-term planning possible. As the inner voice strengthened, so did the capacity for metacognition, thinking about thinking. Humans began observing how their thoughts unfolded. They recognized patterns of fear, desire, memory, and imagination. They noticed how internal narratives shaped their perceptions. This awareness opened the door to higher forms of reflection. Memory played a central role in this process. The inner voice could revisit past experiences, analyzing them from new angles. It could refine lessons learned, adjust beliefs, and reinterpret events. The past became a dynamic landscape rather than a fixed archive. Reflection thrived on these reinterpretations. Imagination also expanded. Internal speech allowed for detailed simulations of the future. Plans became more sophisticated. Humans could build strategies, predict consequences, and envision long-term goals. They could rehearse difficult scenarios silently, preparing themselves emotionally and mentally before acting. Emotion was woven into this process. The inner voice narrated feelings, giving them shape and meaning. A surge of fear became, "I am afraid." A moment of regret became, "I wish I had done differently." Naming emotions did not eliminate them, but it transformed how they were understood. Emotional insight became possible through language. Over time, the inner voice evolved into a vast internal arena where thought was examined, challenged, and refined. Reflection grew deeper, more structured, and more nuanced. The mind became capable of exploring itself with increasing clarity. Yet this new capacity carried a hidden complexity. Not all thoughts could be accessed consciously. Not all motives were visible. Beneath the surface of internal speech lay a darker, more mysterious dimension of the psyche. Reflection had revealed the conscious mind, but it had also exposed its limits. Beyond the reach of deliberate thought, a deeper realm existed. A realm of dreams, instincts, symbols, and hidden motivations. The next chapter descends into this depth, into the shadow, into the unconscious. The shadow and the unconscious. As the inner voice grew stronger and the conscious mind became more articulate, a new frontier emerged, one that could not be accessed by language, reasoning, or deliberate introspection. Beneath the clarity of thought, an older, deeper realm continued to shape experience in ways the reflective mind could not fully see. This hidden domain is the unconscious, the vast undercurrent of impulses, memories, instincts, and symbolic patterns that move beneath awareness. The unconscious is older than reflection. It predates language, culture, and self-awareness. It formed from the raw emotional and instinctual structures inherited from countless generations. Even in early animals, unconscious processes guided fear responses, mating behaviors, territorial instincts, and patterns of attachment. These forces acted automatically, efficiently, and without deliberation. The unconscious was the mind's original operating system, a framework built from survival, repetition, and ancient memory. As the conscious mind expanded through emotion, memory, and the inner voice, these older layers did not disappear. They remained, operating silently beneath reflection. The conscious mind could narrate, analyze, and imagine, but the unconscious continued shaping reactions and desires from behind the scenes. When early humans dreamed, They entered this hidden world. Dreams carried symbols, fears, memories, and unresolved conflicts. They rearranged experiences into strange narratives. They gave form to emotions that had no place in waking life. For ancient cultures, dreams were messages from gods or ancestors. For early shamans, they were doorways into the spirit world. But in psychological terms, dreams were, and remain, windows into the unconscious. As societies grew more complex, humans confronted the fact that their inner worlds were not fully under their control. They felt impulses they could not explain. They reacted emotionally to situations without understanding why. They made choices that contradicted their own intentions. The conscious mind could observe these inconsistencies, but could not always resolve them. This dissonance created the need for deeper reflection. Reflection not just on thoughts, but on the hidden layers beneath them. Much later in history, thinkers like Freud, Jung, and other pioneers of depth psychology attempted to chart this inner territory. They proposed that the mind contained repressed memories, unacknowledged impulses, symbolic images, and archetypes, primordial patterns that shaped dreams, stories, and collective imagination. While many of their theories were imperfect or limited by their era, they recognized something profound. The unconscious is not a flaw in the mind. It is its foundation. Within this foundation, patterns of behavior take shape long before they reach awareness. Emotional responses form automatically. Desires emerge without explanation. Fears linger from old experiences that the conscious mind has forgotten, but the unconscious has not. Even creative insight often springs from unconscious processing. The sudden solution that appears after days of confusion, the vision that emerges fully formed, the intuition that feels instantly true. The unconscious acts as a reservoir. It holds the fragments of experience that the conscious mind cannot process in the moment, memories too painful to face, impulses too conflicting, truths too complex. These fragments do not vanish. They sink deeper, shaping identity in subtle ways. Over time, cultures developed symbolic systems to navigate this unseen realm. Myths reflected unconscious archetypes, heroes, shadows, journeys, transformations. Rituals enacted symbolic conflicts and resolutions. Art gave form to the unspoken, the mysterious, the emotional undercurrents of life. These expressions allowed societies to explore unconscious dynamics collectively long before psychological theories existed. The shadow, a concept later developed by Jung, represents the parts of the self that remain unacknowledged, qualities rejected or ignored, emotions buried, desires unspoken. The shadow is not inherently negative. It contains creativity, passion, potential, and truths that the conscious mind struggles to accept. But when the shadow is ignored, it can distort behavior from the depths. Reflection, therefore, evolved not only to understand the conscious mind, but to illuminate the unconscious. The more humans developed self-awareness, the more they sensed the presence of something deeper guiding their lives. The exploration of dreams, symbols, myths, and art became ways of bridging the conscious with the unconscious. Over generations, this integration built emotional maturity. It helped individuals confront internal conflicts, make sense of contradictory desires, and understand the origins of their behavioral patterns. Reflection became not only an intellectual process, but a journey into the hidden structures of the psyche. The unconscious made the mind multidimensional. It ensured that reflection would always involve uncertainty, complexity, and discovery. It reminded humans that self-knowledge is never complete. that beneath understanding lies another layer waiting to be explored. Yet reflection would not reach its full potential until humanity learned to examine the mind with scientific precision. Philosophy illuminated thought. Religion cultivated inner experience. Psychology ventured into the depths. But another revolution awaited, one rooted not in myth or metaphor, but in biology. The story now turns to the modern age, when reflection met neuroscience, when the search for understanding turned inward toward the physical structure of the brain itself. Neuroscience of reflection. For most of human history, the mind was explored through philosophy, spirituality, and introspection. People examined their thoughts through reasoning, meditation, narrative, and ritual. But the inner world remained mysterious, felt but not measured, known but not mapped. Then, in recent centuries, a new perspective emerged. Humanity turned its attention not only inward, but downward into the physical structures of the brain. The evolution of reflection entered a scientific era where thought could be observed through the lens of biology. This shift did not diminish the richness of inner experience. Instead, it revealed the machinery behind it, the networks, circuits, and rhythms that make reflection possible. The brain, a structure built gradually across millions of years, became the key to understanding how awareness, memory, emotion, and introspection intertwine. At the heart of reflective thought lies a system known as the default mode network. This network spans multiple regions of the brain, activating when external tasks fade and the mind turns inward. When remembering, imagining, daydreaming, considering the future, or analyzing oneself, this network becomes active. It supports narrative thinking, personal identity, and internal dialogue. It is the neural foundation of self-reflection. The default mode network does not operate alone. It works alongside other networks. The salience network, which detects relevance and emotional significance, and the executive network, which handles focus, planning, and deliberate reasoning. Together, these systems create the interplay between inner and outer attention. Reflection depends on this interplay, switching between introspective thought and engagement with the world. Emotion plays a central role in shaping these networks. Regions, such as the amygdala, assign emotional weight to memories and experiences, influencing what the mind revisits and analyzes. The prefrontal cortex helps regulate emotions, guiding reflective thought toward clarity rather than reactivity. Neuroscience shows that emotion is not separate from reflection. It is one of its engines, directing attention inward and giving meaning to internal events. Memory is woven into this architecture as well. The hippocampus, deep within the brain, organizes experiences into coherent narratives. It retrieves fragments of the past and stitches them together into stories. Without this structure, reflection would collapse into isolated moments. The sense of a continuous self, stretching across time, depends on the brain's ability to integrate memory into a unified whole. Language emerges again as a crucial force. The brain regions responsible for speech and comprehension, Broca's area, Wernicke's area, and a constellation of surrounding circuits shape internal dialogue. When thoughts form in words, the brain uses the same pathways it would use for speaking aloud, but the signals remain contained within neural space. Internal speech becomes a simulation of spoken communication, replayed silently within the cortex. This allows reflection to take on clarity and structure, allowing ideas to be examined rather than simply felt. Neuroscience also uncovers how the brain processes the unconscious. Beneath conscious awareness, neural activity continues to shape behavior, decisions, and emotional responses. The basal ganglia store habits and automatic patterns. The limbic system encodes emotional impressions long before the conscious mind interprets them. The brainstem carries ancient programs of survival. These older structures operate continuously, forming the quiet background of thought. Reflection involves glimpsing their influence through emotion, intuition, and pattern recognition. Insight. A sudden realization has its own neural signature. When a person reaches an understanding that previously seemed hidden, a burst of activity occurs in the right temporal lobe. The brain reconfigures information, forging new connections between existing patterns. These moments feel instantaneous, but they arise from prolonged unconscious processing. Insight is the point at which hidden neural work crosses into awareness. Reflection, therefore, is not a unified process. It is the coordination of multiple systems: memory, emotion, language, imagination, perception, working together. The regions responsible for attention and self-awareness must interact synchronously. The brain must quiet certain networks while activating others. This balance is dynamic, shifting constantly as thought moves between past, present, and future. Neuroscience also reveals the limits of reflection. The conscious mind accesses only a fraction of neural activity. Patterns of thought, emotion, and memory drift beneath awareness, shaping attitudes and responses without deliberate choice. The mind reflects only as deeply as it is able to see. Much remains hidden, inaccessible, or filtered by emotion and belief. Yet the brain is remarkably adaptable. Reflection is not fixed. It grows through experience. New neural pathways form as individuals learn, imagine, and practice introspection. Reflection expands with exposure to different cultures, languages, and environments. The brain reshapes itself constantly, and reflection evolves with it. This biological perspective connects back to the ancient story. The brain is the culmination of evolutionary layers: instinct at the core, emotion wrapped around it, memory and language above, and self-awareness emerging from the interplay of all these structures. Reflection is not a single function, but a convergence of the entire evolutionary history of the mind. But even with this scientific understanding, reflection does not exist in a vacuum. It is shaped not only by biology, but by the world in which a person lives. The surrounding culture, society, and shared narratives influence how individuals interpret their thoughts and who they believe themselves to be. To fully understand reflection, the story must now expand outward again, beyond the brain, beyond biology, into the collective environments that shape identity. The next chapter explores this wider dimension: how culture, identity, language, and society sculpt the inner world and determine how reflection unfolds. Culture, identity, and thought. Reflection does not unfold in isolation. It emerges within a world of symbols, customs, shared meanings, and expectations. As humans formed larger societies, the inner world became deeply shaped by the cultures surrounding it. Biology created the mind's architecture, but culture provided its content, its stories, values, languages, and lenses. Every culture develops its own framework for understanding experience. These frameworks influence how people interpret emotions, perceive themselves, and make sense of the world. Reflection begins with raw thought, but it is culture that gives thought structure, boundaries, and texture. Language plays a central role. Different languages emphasize different concepts, shaping the internal landscape in subtle but profound ways. Some languages draw sharp distinctions between past, present, and future. Others blend time into a single continuous flow. Some emphasize individuality, others emphasize relationship and community. Each linguistic structure becomes a filter through which the mind reflects on itself. Identity forms within this linguistic and cultural framework. Families teach children how to express feelings, when to speak, when to remain silent, how to interpret success, how to process failure. These early influences become internalized. Reflection becomes shaped by the voices absorbed during childhood, the instructions, stories, warnings, and hopes encoded through repetition and experience. Social norms also sculpt reflection. In some cultures, introspection is valued and encouraged. In others, direct self-examination is rare, and reflection is expressed through ritual, art, or community, rather than private internal dialogue. The mind learns which thoughts are acceptable to express and which must remain hidden. This distinction shapes the development of the shadow, the inner terrain formed by what society discourages or ignores. Collective narratives guide entire communities. Myths, histories, and shared memories frame how societies understand themselves. These narratives can be sources of strength or sources of conflict. They influence how people interpret personal struggles, how they define purpose, and how they imagine the future. Reflection is not only personal, it is also collective. A mind draws meaning from the stories its society tells about the world. Cultural expectations shape emotional experience as well. Some cultures emphasize restraint and calmness. Others encourage open expression. Some value independence, while others prioritize interdependence. These cultural values influence how individuals reflect on their own emotions, whether they see anger as a signal to act, a burden to suppress, or a problem to solve. Whether they understand sadness as weakness, transformation, connection, or something sacred. Even silence carries different meanings across cultures. In some traditions, silence is a form of respect or contemplation. In others, it is seen as avoidance or withdrawal. These interpretations shape how the mind experiences quiet moments, whether they feel peaceful, uncomfortable, or revealing. As societies grew, the inner world became increasingly complex. Social roles emerged: leaders, healers, craftsmen, storytellers, warriors, scholars. Each role carried expectations that shaped self-reflection. A healer reflected on suffering differently than a leader did. A scholar interpreted uncertainty differently than a warrior. Identity became layered, and reflection adapted to each layer. Modern societies amplify this complexity. The global exchange of ideas exposes individuals to multiple cultural frameworks. People adopt narratives from different traditions, blending them into hybrid identities. Reflection becomes multidimensional, shaped by heritage, environment, technology, and constant streams of information. Technology, especially, influences reflective life. Written language preserved thoughts across generations. Printing multiplied ideas. Digital technology accelerated them further, producing a constant flow of voices, perspectives, and distractions. Reflection requires space, but the modern world compresses time. The inner voice competes with noise. Attention becomes fragmented. Yet humanity adapts. Cultural movements emerge that emphasize mindfulness, therapy, journaling, self-inquiry, creative expression. Societies reinvent practices that reconnect the mind with quiet, depth, and meaning. The reflective mind evolves with its environment, reshaping itself to meet new challenges. Culture provides the context in which personal reflection becomes meaningful. It determines how individuals understand themselves, how they relate to others, how they interpret suffering, and how they define purpose. It expands or constrains the inner world depending on the narratives it offers. But culture is always changing, and in the modern world, change is accelerating. Technology reshapes both identity and thought. Artificial intelligence, digital environments, and global connectivity challenge the very nature of reflection. The inner world now extends beyond the physical brain, merging with tools, networks, and virtual spaces. What then becomes of reflection in a future shaped by these forces? The final chapter turns toward that horizon, into the future of the mind, into the evolving landscape of reflection. The future of reflection. Reflection has traveled a long path, from the first sparks of awareness in ancient oceans to the rich, layered inner worlds of modern humanity. Yet its evolution is far from complete. New forces are shaping the mind, expanding its capacities while challenging its foundations. Technology, information, artificial intelligence, and global interconnectedness are reshaping not only how people think, but what thinking itself means. The future of reflection is a frontier unlike any before it, a landscape where ancient patterns meet unprecedented possibilities. Humanity now lives in an age where thoughts can be externalized instantly. Ideas can be recorded, shared, multiplied, and analyzed at unimaginable speeds. The mind no longer holds its reflections alone. It distributes them across devices, networks, and digital memories. This extended mind changes the nature of introspection. It allows ideas to evolve collaboratively, shaped by countless perspectives. Yet, it also risks overwhelming the inner world with constant noise and complexity. Attention has become one of the most valuable resources. In ancient times, silence was abundant and distraction rare. Today, distraction is abundant and silence rare. Reflection requires space, moments where the mind can wander, reorganize, and uncover meaning. Without such space, thought becomes reactive, shallow, and fragmented. The modern challenge is not simply to think, but to protect the conditions that make deep thinking possible. Artificial intelligence introduces a new dimension to this landscape. Tools that can analyze data, generate ideas, and simulate reasoning now coexist with human minds. These tools provide extraordinary opportunities for understanding. They can help individuals observe patterns they might miss, process information more clearly, or explore ideas more deeply. But they also raise questions about identity, creativity, and the boundaries of thought. If machines can reflect in limited but growing ways, what does that mean for human reflection? The future mind may become increasingly hybrid. External tools may augment memory, creativity, and reasoning. Neural interfaces may one day allow direct interaction between thought and technology. Such advances could expand the reflective capacity of the mind beyond what evolution alone could achieve. But these expansions also demand wisdom. Reflection must grow not only in power, but in awareness, balance, and ethical understanding. Another influence on future reflection comes from global cultural exchange. Ideas from different traditions now move instantaneously across the world. Individuals can draw from philosophies, spiritual practices, and psychological insights that once belonged to distant cultures. This blending of perspectives creates new models of the self, new ways of understanding identity, consciousness, and purpose. Reflection becomes more adaptable, more inclusive, more nuanced. Yet with this openness comes a new form of uncertainty. When identities are fluid and narratives shift rapidly, the mind can struggle to find coherence. Reflection must evolve to handle this fluidity, to create meaning, even when familiar structures dissolve. This evolution may deepen introspective skills, helping individuals navigate internal complexity with clarity rather than confusion. Solitude, too, will transform. In ancient times, solitude was often physical: forests, deserts, mountains. In the modern world, solitude becomes psychological, an intentional separation from noise rather than from people. Digital silence will become a form of inner refuge, necessary for restoring attention and depth. Reflection will depend on the ability to step back from constant connectivity, to allow the mind to settle into its own rhythms. The future may also bring advances in understanding consciousness itself. Neuroscience continues to uncover the brain's mechanisms, how networks interact, how insight emerges, how memories form and fade, how emotions shape perception. These discoveries will refine the way individuals understand their own minds. Reflection will grow more precise. People will become better equipped to identify cognitive biases, emotional patterns, and the hidden influences of the unconscious. At the same time, the mystery of consciousness may remain intact. For all the brain reveals, the subjective experience of awareness, the feeling of being, may never be fully explained. This mystery will continue to draw minds inward, fueling the desire to reflect, question, and explore. In the future, reflection will likely become not just a personal skill, but a societal necessity. As technology accelerates change, humanity will need reflective capacities to navigate ethical dilemmas, cultural shifts, and ecological challenges. Fast action will require slow thought. Innovation will require wisdom. Complexity will require clarity. And reflection will remain the foundation of this clarity. Throughout its evolutionary journey, reflection has given humans the ability to understand themselves, to question their world, to imagine new possibilities, and to find meaning in the midst of uncertainty. It has shaped consciousness into a deep and textured landscape. It has allowed life not only to exist, but to know itself. The future promises new horizons, some uncertain, some transformative, all demanding a deeper relationship with the inner world. Reflection will adapt, expand, and evolve, carrying with it the full history of mind across time. From the earliest organisms, sensing faint signals in ancient waters, to humans contemplating their existence in an age of technology, the evolution of reflection is one of the most remarkable stories in the universe. A story still unfolding. A story with no final chapter. Only the ongoing expansion of awareness across time. Closing reflection. Across billions of years, the universe carved a path from simple reaction to profound introspection. Reflection did not appear suddenly, nor did it emerge fully formed. It was built slowly, layer by layer, through the silent work of evolution. Molecules organized into cells. Cells organized into bodies. Bodies developed senses, instincts, emotions, memory, language, and imagination. From these ingredients, the inner world took shape. A world vast enough to hold fear, desire, curiosity, wonder, and meaning. Reflection is the culmination of this long, intricate journey. It allows a mind to turn inward, to examine itself, to question its own origins, and to trace its own evolution. It transforms experience into understanding. It transforms memory into identity. It transforms imagination into possibility. It gives shape to the unseen currents of consciousness. From ancient oceans to modern cities, reflection has guided the development of culture, philosophy, religion, science, and art. It has given rise to the stories that define civilizations and the insights that shape human lives. It has helped individuals confront their fears, explore their dreams, and seek purpose in a world that is both vast and mysterious. The evolution of reflection is not merely a scientific story, it is a human story. Every inner voice, every moment of clarity, every question about meaning carries the imprint of millions of years of development. The ability to think about thought, to look at one's own mind with curiosity, is one of the rarest achievements in the history of life. And the story continues. Reflection keeps expanding as the world changes. New experiences reshape the mind. New tools extend its reach. New questions lead to deeper understanding. The future will bring challenges and transformations, but reflection will remain the guiding force that helps humanity navigate them. In this vast unfolding, the inner world remains one of the greatest frontiers. Not made of earth or sky, but of awareness, quiet, complex, and endlessly deep. The exploration of this frontier is ongoing. With every question asked, with every memory examined, with every story told, reflection continues to evolve. The universe became conscious through the long journey of life. Through reflection, consciousness becomes aware of itself. The story of reflection is the story of how life learned not only to survive, but to understand.